Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining my live. This live specifically is about kind of the executive challenge of implementing new tech in your organization and why that level of executive doesn't often understand the technology that you're working on. So before I get into it, while people are joining the live, I'll just do kind of a quick intro for logistics. I'm Kyler Cheatham. I'm a business systems expert. And then my firm also implements technology at every level. We do anything from, large business enterprise systems to smaller custom built AI agents. I'm not trying to sell you any software. I don't care what software you buy as long as it's the best choice for your organization. And one of the biggest things we see a lot of times is kind of that executive bottleneck, or really that, stopgap that executives really cannot handle the understanding of what technology needs. And a lot of times, like, that is absolutely the case for good reason, right? It could have to do with age, it could have to do with experience, it could have to do with marketplace. And we're really going to get into unpeeling that or peeling that back all today. So with that, I just wanted to let you know that this often is not about what I want to talk about. It's about what you want to talk about, right? So I invite you, happy Tuesday, favorite time of the day. I'm glad you're here. But this is about asking questions and having that opportunity to get this type of advice or give your own advice, because a lot of it is not about what I want to say. It's about what's best for your business. And we hear a lot of that through insights that are shared in the comments. It would be impossible for me to know every single system or have implemented in every single industry. So definitely feel free to drop that in there. And so I think starting this baseline conversation while we get, some questions or, whatever else we want to share, is just looking at like the average age of, a Fortune. Hi, Andrew. Happy to see you. The average age of like a Fortune 500 executive, right? And that's a big piece that we need to kind of keep in mind about like what their professional experience has looked like. I mean, arguably, this is one of the generations that has experienced the most change in the workforce. And this is not about ageism. I think that, boomer type of employees as well as executives have a lot to bring to the table when it comes to wisdom and overall tribal knowledge. So I think they're often, especially Gen X, is the kind of forgotten generation of the workforce when they're really incredibly valuable, right? So yes, the topic is about executives that don't know about technology. So right now I'm explaining to you why that might be, right? So if we look at, and I always have my outline behind me, so if you see me glance, that's what I'm looking at. But so if we look at the average age of an executive, it's about 55 to 60 years old. So we are talking about like the Windows 95 generation. Even myself explained to a lot of our junior engineers what the 90s was like, right? It was much different in technology, when they were starting to kind of come up in the organization. Is that an excuse for being a bottleneck? Absolutely not. But it's important to understand and have a baseline for this conversation. And then when we look at board of directors at pre-cloud era, it was like pre-cloud, right? Like we barely even had operating systems. Like we were wired to the wall, right? There wasn't even like this thing called the World Wide Web, right? That was something that was still very new, especially in business environments of like, how do all of these connect? So the average age of board members are about 60 to 66. And I think that's important because one thing we hear, and I do a lot in my skit videos, is the board of directors is like, we need AI agents without having any idea what an AI agent is, or understanding the architecture of the organization, the infrastructure that's needed to support a network of agents, right? And that's a huge problem. Is it on them? For sure, right? But just understanding what that looks like. And then even I would add like founders into this have a hard time understanding like standardization for our board members are 80 plus. Oh man, woo! They bring a lot of wisdom to the table, I'm sure. But even founders, like eccentric founders, can be a huge bottleneck to standardization business tech as well, right? So if we take age out of the equation, Founders are amazing, right? They're eccentric entrepreneurs. I am one, right? I'm not the CEO of our company because I'm not CEO material, right? Is that a judgment? For sure not. But I don't have the skills, right, to be able to say, oh, let's make sure that we're financially stable or something like that. When it comes to business systems, we see that a lot with founders. If they're really like standing in the way, they either don't want to spend the money or they somehow think they're, cool new startup, which might be, 30 years old at this point, doesn't need boring tech. They're going to do it differently, which, go for it, right? But it's going to cost you a lot more in processes, employees, and turnover and those types of things. So that's in a bucket too of executives that don't understand technology in any way, shape, or form. Let's see, how much should executives know about technology? So I'm going to turn around this question a little bit, because it doesn't matter what they know. It matters almost like what they're willing to listen to from their team. And that's where they get in trouble a lot of. And I'll give you an example, from one of our clients. We have, and we work on the enterprise level. So usually $1 billion plus is really where my company focuses in. So we had, a bigger client that was in the mining industry that was purchased by a private equity firm that's a global firm. And what this firm, famous last words, the leadership team said, we're going to let the business choose its ERP system. No problem. They know what's best. We're just coming in. We're going to let them choose, go through the evaluation. You guys help them. Awesome. Can do. So went through the evaluation, right? Did all of the requirements, started to identify systems that might work. They chose one, and they also chose a system integrator to help them with it. There was a tier 2 integrator that was located where they were located and was a system specialist. They were a great option for them because they really wanted someone that was absolutely focused in, hyper-focused in the system that they wanted, because it was an MES type of ERP system, manufacturing execution system, which can be harder to implement, right? It's very complex manufacturing when it comes to mining. And there's a lot of enterprise asset management. When we have $40 million dump trucks and all of these different things, we need to make sure that they actually work, or that's a huge bottom line. And so when we looked at that, we had it all in line, and then all of a sudden the board of directors was slowly getting messages from bigger system integrators being like, why aren't we involved in this, this type of thing. And they ended up completely reversing on that decision, and they're likely going to go with a whole nother system and a whole nother global work of integrators. Obviously we weren't a great match for them because that wasn't something that we felt like we supported, right? We openly said, you need to be honest about what you're going to do, right? Do what you're going to do as the leaders of the company. It's your choice. It's your call ultimately. But you need to be clear with these people because they're putting in their time and effort. So if you're not going to listen to them, just say that, right? It would make everything much easier if you were just honest about that. So that's an example of when the executive team reverses on the business or the technical team, and that's going to cause a plethora of issues. I guarantee it, right? With turnover in the business, from people to processes that they have no idea what that business does. But they know they have all of these global relationships with private equity partners, and they kind of, need to kiss the hand that feeds them, right? I guess. So definitely a hard lesson for them that they'll just have to learn. There's only so much we can say, or that you can say, as the voice of reason in these conversations, and being like, I don't think that's a good idea. Ultimately, it's going to be their call. If they're not listening to you, they're showing you who they are, right? How dangerous do executives need to be when it comes to technically effective? They don't need to be dangerous at all, right? They need to be able to listen to their team and understand that they need to be the one that supports their team while looking at things like financial spend, right? That's where they're very good at kind of looking through these different contracts and being like, I know you guys want this system. but we also have to buy a whole new HVAC system for our global data centers, right? Or something like that that's going to cost us $200 million. So that obviously the technical team won't see. So they need to be able to go back in and be like, hey, here's what's going on. They don't need to know what an AI agent is, but they need to be savvy enough financially to understand what's a good decision and what's a rush decision, right? It turns out EMT Next was purchased by our management. Cool. How do you feel about that? That definitely is something, I mean, it could go either way, right? It's a legit system. So, and I think that isn't a bad thing in many ways, but it certainly needs to be, right, end user focused. That can happen a lot when private equity happens. So what incentives should be put into place to get executives to listen and be honest? So when we're building a business case, and we do this all the time, right, with director level, VP level, to bring to their executive team, even the C-suite to bring to the board, right? And so I don't know that they're gonna essentially always be honest, because people aren't always honest, right? There's many reasons for that, which I'm not a psychologist, and I can't tell you. I can give you a lot of experience as to why, especially in these situations. But I think for the business case, it has to be all about like economic awareness. How is this going to make you more money, right? It's going to make you more efficient, right? It's going to make you faster. Are you going to implement it in more of like a per business unit, agile, don't freak out saying that word, mini waterfall fashion, where you're going to do it in one area of the business and then you're going to let that implementation pay for the next area of the business? Are you going to be saving money in on-premise license fees and things like that? What is it going to be? And that's the language that they speak. They don't necessarily care that this is, the most shiny, blazing warehouse management system in the whole entire world. That's cool. Is it going to make the team faster so they can get more product out the door, right? How can we get the level of trust where the executive will listen to recommendations and constraints of the system? I think, again, it always has to come down to how are the constraints of the system losing money, right? So if if you guys are obsessed with AI agents, whatever, right? But we can't implement AI agents because of the constraints of this system, right? We're on a 30-year-old green screen. We can't be doing that and plugging things in, right? And that's so challenging to be able to do, especially when they're like hyper focused on that. If you want that to be a priority, cool. I mean, I love AI agents personally. I'd love to be on the forefront of that innovation project. But at the end of the day, right, we can't do that unless we have the architecture to help with that, right? Let's see. That sounds like firms have to relearn the same system. What a terrible system. Are you talking about ETM Next? Or what's terrible system? Because I love to talk about terrible systems. Would an older board see it as legacy protection? They just resist change for history's sake? I think it depends on the size of the organization, right? So if you replace a legacy ERP system, that's a huge risk to the business, right? I have a whole TikTok channel that some of my most popular videos are about these bigger implementations that have failed. Not to dog on those businesses, but a lot of people like to dog on those businesses. It's mostly about learning in my videos from those case studies, but they could risk high profile failure, right, in those types of things. And so you have to remember that they're going to see that as a massive risk for the organization. It totally depends, what are stock prices right now? Are we profitable? What are all of these different things? I don't think they resist change for history's sake most of the time, right? We see that a lot in family-owned businesses that are on 3 or 4 generations, and they're struggling to, the younger generation wants to be more modern, but the older generation that's still in control is hey, this is the way we grew to $500 million, so we're going to do it my way. And that second generation doesn't really have the decision-making power, and it's been diluted from 2 people to 14 in the next generation. And that's very complex, especially family owned. Make more money in what timeline? I think that's what you have to define, right? In the business case. So I have made the more money argument many times. Let's see. Sorry. It pops up on me, so I lose the question. I've made the more money argument many times with the sound backup. Executives still don't listen. So I'll tell, I feel like stories are really helpful to understand these types of things. I had someone on TikTok message me this kind of whole same type of story. They did their job and they ended up being laid off by the company because there were financial issues that they didn't know about. And she even messaged me and she was like, you were right, because I had said to her, there's only so much you can do in your circle of influence. If they're not going to listen to you, they're not going to listen to you. Like that mining client I was telling you guys about, of just do what you're going to do, but make sure everybody is aware of that so that they can do an effective job and there's not a ton of disruption. At the end of the day, if the executives aren't listening to you and they're not telling you why, I think that's showing you who they are. Right. And if it were me, I would be looking for another position at another company where I actually could make an impact, and bringing a lot of these materials, right, from an anonymous standpoint and showcasing what I was able to build, a business plan, a case study, all of these different things, because that is good skills to have. But at the end of the day, if they're not going to listen to you, they're not going to listen to you. And they're likely not going to change in a fast amount of time, right? A decision made now might not make money quick, but down the line, it will gain returns. And you got to have to scope that out for them, right? That's a story you have to tell. And it's going to cost us $50 million to replace the system. That's a lot of money, right? But in 3 years, because of the efficiencies that we gained and mined from our broken processes, we would be, much faster and more profitable because of that ability. And that's very normal for projects this size, right? Is there an industry where execs hesitate the most when investing in new tech? I would say engineering for sure. Those damn engineers, they want to think through every single option, right? Higher education is a big one, right? They also are incredibly logical. I always say the smarter and more pedigreed the client, the more challenging it can be, because they want to think through, they have a hard time seeing things high level, right? It's like any sort of IT manager. If you're an IT manager, likely, you were promoted because you can speak to the engineers, right? They like you, you can, for the most part, right? You can speak engineer, but if you can't do that, it's very, very challenging in those types of things. I think the other ones that are private equity owned, because private equity is going to do what private equity wants to do. What's best for their portfolio, not what's best for the business, right? It's a terrible system when execs don't listen to your example of reversing tech implementations. What are you reversing? I'm just so curious about that. Then they learn the hard way over and over and move on to another company, for sure. Absolutely. Let's see. Always love a story time. What are the risks of an ERP system, implementing one? Well, they're the most expensive system you can buy, for sure, right? They're the largest, right? So when we think about things, a lot of people ask me, why does SAP fail more? And it's well, it doesn't, right? It just is bigger, right? So we see it more in our conversations, as opposed to a smaller tier 3 system that nobody really cares, right? It was a $6 million failure. Again, I guarantee the business cares, right? But it's not these headlines where it's the U.S. Navy lost $1 billion. U.S. Air Force, I'm sorry, don't come for me, Navy. Lost, $1 billion because of an implementation, right? It's not the drama that we love to hear. I think the risk of an ERP system is the amount of money that you spend on it and the amount of disruption that it comes from the business. So we're talking finance, accounting, marketing, production, manufacturing. It's going to cover every area. So you need to make sure that the organization is in lockstep to get there. If we're buying a new financial system, we're just focusing on the finance department, right? If we're buying a new supply chain system, we're just focusing on production, right? And IT's involved in all of that, but they're the leaders of the technical system. So that's one of the biggest risks. And then, another thing like that is like, what about the SaaS licenses? That's a huge risk of the modern day ERP system in 2026. You're leasing somebody else's computer and they have any point could go down, right? We saw this with Salesforce on the 17th, where their cloud went down, right? And AWS happens. It happens all the time with hyperscalers, but then the licenses for SaaS, like the financial piece of that, they have the ability to make that go up, make it go down, make it go up, make it go down. They're never going to make it go down. Let me just tell you that right now. So that's a huge risk of not understanding the total cost of ownership, because we got into a situation where we don't know how much our fees are going to be for every 3 years, right? So too many execs claim to be all about the money and then just go off vibes, for sure, right? Higher education is my field. It's impossible to get good software. So I'm not laughing. I'm so sorry. So like, are you talking about like collegiate type of businesses? Are you talking about like academia? Like what are you talking about? It is almost impossible to get good software for those. It's very challenging. So if we're like in academia, we look more at like the school district type of things. I've had lots of success with like Infor in that area. So yeah, let me know what we're talking about. Let's see. On the flip side, CEOs who change but are ill-informed or have overconfidence in tech. I mean, I think anyone that is a CEO has a bit of fake confidence, right? Because they have the ability to be a leader and stand up in the room. But a lot of times, like we even saw this with 2025, the executive standing on stage being like, this is the year of AI. And we're like, cool. What does that mean? One, the business has a lot of AI right now already. You just don't think it's cool. And then also, what type of AI are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? Right? That is a statement, not any sort of strategy. And that is a big problem. Just that, one, everyone's terrified. Half of the, all-team meeting that you just called is going back to their desk and applying for different jobs. And then other than that, we have the ability to not understand at all what you're talking about. Like people's jobs will change and how, right? You can't just like leave that in limbo, right? Like leave them on red and be like, bye, I'm never going to talk to you about this again. That's awful, right? Great job, Kyler. Keep up the great work. Thank you. I really appreciate you being here. What's the most common pain points that signal an ERP replacement is necessary? Ooh, let's see. That is very focused to the organization, but I would say critical functions. We can't ship product. Your ERP is for sure broken, right? We have to pull all that data out, move it into a spreadsheet, upload it into warehouse management, right? So that it can't do that. We can't send invoices. You got to get paid, right? Those are all critical functions, and we can't essentially fake those. And that's a big piece of an ERP implementation, is that a replacement is necessary. A lot of times people want to replace their ERP system because they hate it, right? But it's not essentially necessary, right? If your team hates it, I think that's something to consider, but there's still things you can do to kind of reevaluate that perception of that. Do they hate it because they don't know how to use it? Do they hate it because it makes their job harder? Like, what is that? And you're going to have to get to the bottom of that anyway, right? If you are going to buy a new ERP system, because that's part of the discovery process, so you can make sure you buy the right one, right? Not all ERP systems are created equal. They're very, very different, right? And need to be focused on the industry in which they serve. They need to be focused on the business side. They need to be focused on the overall objective and goal, right? A lot of people come to us that say they want an ERP system. They definitely don't need an ERP system, right? Especially, you don't need to spend millions on that. You need a manufacturing system, right? So let's spend a little bit less and focus on what you actually need instead of like what someone told you on a golf course that, Oh yeah, SAP will fix all your problems. The amount of times I've heard that, if I had $1, I would be a rich person. I'm rich in life because I have you guys here. Record management. Okay. I don't know that one. So let me take it back and then I'll message you. I do that all the time on these things. I did it last week because what did we have? We had a municipality from Sweden on last week that I needed to go to the delivery team and get some more information about that before I could answer effectively. But I hear your executive challenge with higher education. That's one of the hardest industries. My university announced that they are using a lot of AI tools. I don't think they know how it works. And I mean, they probably don't, right? And I mean, good for the university for embracing AI because a lot of higher education has like an anti-AI policy, but we've got to like define what type of AI, right? And that's why a lot of times when we go into an organization, especially if we're working with agents, we're like, hey, we need to rename this, right? So we're not going to call it AI. We're going to call it, Project Spartacus, Leprechaun, right? Whatever. So that we can rebrand it into thinking that like what type of AI, so we can create some accountability around that, clearly explain to people what's happening. The amount of executives that are terrible at explaining things. A lot of times I'm like, we just need to send you all to like some sort of like real quick business school where you can just learn to tell stories like normal human people, right? That's all you got to do, right? It's not that complicated. I don't care if you went to MIT or Harvard or Stanford or whatever else you paid to get into, right? That's not impressive. It's impressive if you can actually lead by making people feel safe, right? That's all. It's not that complicated, right? Then they create shadow systems when they get out of all that team. Yeah, I mean, shadow systems are a huge issue, right? Even for a large, massive organization, shadow systems, vibe coding from the business where they're pushing stuff into production where it breaks a bunch of shit, right? And then they call IT and they're like, hey, can you fix, my agent? IT's like, what agent? That's not collaboration, my friends, right? So let's see. How are you using your AI tools? Wealth is health. Amen. Policy drafting, human editing. Shouldn't they know that before they become execs? Well, that's the thing. Like, I had this executive that I worked for at a Fortune 500 company. I think he's an idiot, and I hated him. But he said one smart thing to me one time. And he wasn't even talking to me, right? Of course, he didn't even know who I was. As most of them don't at that level, right? They wouldn't know you from Adam. But he said promotions often depend on two things, luck and timing, right? So if you are an executive, who's ever had one of those directors where you're like, this person's an idiot? Like, I truly do not understand how they're in this seat. There probably was no one else, right? And in those Fortune 500 companies, they're always going to promote internally because it's less expensive for them, right? They know how much that candidate makes. As opposed to pulling anyone in from a director and above level, it's going to be, easy 6 figures plus bonus structures and things like that for no matter what position. And so that's really the biggest issue is, they get into this position by lucking out, not by talent. A lot of times this happens too, especially in the IT world, when we promote a really effective individual contributor. Individual contributors that are highly motivated and highly effective often make very bad managers, at least for their first year, I would say to 3 years, right? Because they now have to motivate a team and be a leader to that team as opposed to having to do everything themselves, right? And that makes them wildly uncomfortable because that's not their process. Can they learn from that if they're open-minded, right? If they're vulnerable and saying, you know what, that was I made a mistake, right? And going to their team and saying, you know what, that's on me. I apologize for that. Because I guarantee, when you do that, more people respect you than when you go and give some frou-frou answer about like how that wasn't really my fault and, fake accountability. People want to see leaders that have been through it, right? Right now, I'm judging grants for the state of Colorado when it comes to innovation grants, who's going to get that money. Well, a lot of times I want to see a founder that's failed before, right? Like I want to see someone that understands how they've moved through resilience. Not that all founders have to fail, but a lot of times if you have that ability to look back and say, hey, this is something that I did wrong or I want to do differently, right? I've had many businesses that I've had that failed, right? And that used to be something that I held really on tight to, but I think it's a superpower, right? Of being able to do that. So let's see. Whose fault is it for shadow systems? I actually really like this question, okay, because it's something we really need to dig into as an organization. And even I hear a lot of people on my channel being like, how would anyone have a shadow system when IT can see everything you do? Well, the modern workforce, right? Say we're at a Fortune 500 company of 20,000 plus employees globally. We can't monitor what those employees are doing all day long, right? So say, they have a laptop at home and they're, using that off of the VPN and they're plugging things into ChatGPT from there so that we have a security issue in that conversation. A lot of times, whose fault is shadow system? The leadership team, right? Because they didn't effectively explain why that's a risk to the organization. That employee that's doing that is probably trying to do their job better, right? They're trying to be more efficient. They're trying to produce better work. 9 times out of 10, it's not a nefarious employee that opens up, a phishing scam or some sort of cybersecurity issue or launches a shadow system. It's someone that's trying to do their job better because they're not given the tools that they need to do it well in the first place, right? And so that is on leadership team. I would also say that if you have an organization like that, you need a very structured, love you, bye. Love you too. Bye. Sorry, my husband's leaving. He's traveling. So you also need a very, very sophisticated IT department that's going to be able to understand things like release management. And that's a big thing that we've gotten into in the last couple of years is restructuring IT departments because it's very, very hard. And we see this a lot of times when we implement a new system. They're like, okay, like how do we do this? How do we have like release management? How do we grow up as a department? Because the modern IT department, and this is the big issue with CIOs today, they were the basement dweller computer fixers, right? They're not a collaborator, right? They wanted to hang out down here and write some code. Well, now the executive is like, you're no longer a cost center. You're part of the business. And they're like, whoa, like I don't want to do that. Right? So the CIO is now a business leader, not someone that just fixed computers, but likely that CIO grew up in that organization in the IT department. So this is a huge transition for them, right? So that's what I would say. IT, if they don't know how to do that, they need to figure it out. And then also the leadership team needs to explain to people what a cybersecurity risk is and why shadow systems are a problem. Then to follow up with that, to address the actual reason that the employee or the team did that, right? Is it because they don't have effective technology that you need to effectively support them on? You need to figure that out, right? So love your channel. You're very good and wish all execs would watch you. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you guys are here because you guys are the future executives. I say this all the time to our team, especially Mix in here. If you don't follow him, he's on our team. And has his own channel that has much younger viewers. They're cool and hip. But those are the CIOs of the future. They are. And if we don't help them to get to the point of where they understand what they deserve and how to run a good team, then we're just gonna keep repeating ourselves, right? And promoting bad executives. So it seems like a terrible system. Yeah, I mean, you're right? You're right. So it's true that if you're too good at your job, you won't get, is it true if you're too good at your job, you won't get promoted? I mean, if you have an idiot leader, I mean, any organization or team I've managed, absolutely not, right? Too good at their job means they need an additional challenge. Like let's give this person a senior manager role and really see what they can do and see how they can, fly. So if anyone ever told you that, they're stupid, right? And if you're ever in a situation where your manager is saying like, you're really good at this job, stay in that seat, that person is not your advocate. And you need to listen close to how you can get the hell off that team, right? Let's see. people get promoted until they find something they're bad at. I mean, and being bad, failure is not a bad thing, right? That's a lot of times when we do, like, we go into these big ERP implementations, everyone's like freaking out, you know, and system integrators there trying to sell them a bunch of shit they don't need or something like that. What we're going to do is we're going to fail fast with less risk, because we're going to fail. There's no doubt about it. I have never, ever, ever seen an ERP implementation that doesn't run into some type of failure. Hopefully, right, it's on a micro level and not when we're pushing it to go live, because we did really good testing and due diligence. And we have a really good plan that's a tested plan, right? But a lot of times people don't want to put in that hard work. They just want to go and like pray that it works. And I'm here to tell you it doesn't, right? So mainly because there's no one else that can replace you. Again, that's small man thinking, in my opinion, right? That's if no one else can replace that, again, it's not on the employee to figure this out. It's on the leadership team. Maybe there's no one to replace you, but I mean, this person's going to be managing, ideally, that next person. So isn't that amazing that they're able to, you know, kind of train and help grow, not just one of them, but 5 of them? Because now they're on a team where they can manage that. Do they need support in being able to do that? Hell yeah, right? You can't just be like, here, teach all of these people what you do. That's not how that works. We're human beings. We're all different and unique in our own way, right? But I don't know any good leader that if they came to me, you know, as someone who's an executive coach and said like, hey, I can't replace this person because no one can do it, I would be like, well, that sounds like you need to be replaced, because again, that's loser talk, as I say. So, but a lot of folks who have failed had the privilege of being able to fail. Many aren't privileged. So well said. Grants sometimes perpetuate systems that underserve, remaining underserved. Great point. I love that point. That is such an important thing to say. Yeah, come join the fun over on Mick's channel. He's much cooler than me, right? Jesus Christ loves you. He absolutely does. Tell us how you really feel. You know, that's really not my jam, right? Which is why I'm a corporate dropout. I'm not capable of such things or being well behaved, right? Almost every leader I have admired has failed, but it's the way they manage that failure that's different. Absolutely, right? And if it's on them, they say it's on them. Hey guys, this was on me, right? Not that they need to shame themselves, but just saying like, I should have done this differently, and this is my plan to do it differently next time. If you've had a leader that's never apologized to you or the team, I think that's telling a lot about them too, right? The best results I've seen in higher end is when sub-departments have dedicated IT staff. I'm so interested in you. I can't wait to hear more about like what you do. I agree with that so much, but then how do we have a unified department, or do we need one, right? Is the better question, right? Is that necessary? But it sounds like, on the ERP level, it might be, right? Let's see. Always consolidate IT when streamlining. And that's very easy, right? Especially if we're working on like different systems in different areas, right? So let's see. How come there isn't that freedom to fail? I would say on the leadership, because we like a lot of things, failure isn't explained well, right? Like immediately has this negative connotation. And don't get me wrong, you can fail badly, but a lot of times that's because you failed and then we lied about it and then we didn't tell people about it and we didn't ask for help, right? So there was many other factors in that. It wasn't the fact that the system failed to do what we wanted to do. It's because we didn't listen to the engineers. We didn't effectively test what the engineers were saying to us. Oh, and we picked a system that they didn't ask for, nor did they want, right? And when things looked like they were getting weird, we just powered through. And that's not it, right? And then so that's why your failure went from a tiny, tiny little baby snowball to this massive thing that we can't stop from hurtling down the hill and hitting the entire organization because we didn't learn how to fail effectively. So I think that freedom to fail is something a lot of people like to talk about, but it takes a very intentional leadership team to make that culture okay, right? To make their middle management specifically feel like solid enough, confident enough to come say, hey, right, my team failed at this. And that should be seen as like, oh, interesting. Definitely let's talk through that. Not, oh, you're so stupid, I hate you, you're never getting promoted, right? And a lot of times in corporate America, that's what it feels like. Or in, I would say global corporate too, right? So just ask the Germans. No, I'm just joking. I love German jokes. Mostly because, all of my SAP colleagues are German, obviously. But a lot of times when I speak to my German audiences at different conferences, they won't laugh at my jokes, like, ever. And I'll be like, so am I funny or I'm not funny, right? Let's see. Why isn't there some kind of accountability structure around failed go lives from SIs? Because the contracts weren't done well, right? Because a lot of times those bigger contracts, they try and they do a couple things, right? They try and bait you in with I can only get you this pricing through next month. We just went through this with our client, or in the process of doing that. They're like, hey, I got you this 5% discount, but I can only get it for you until, the end of the month. And these are $1 billion organizations. So, even the security review is going to take 45 days. That's just not going to happen, right? And then all of a sudden it's them that's the asshole that because they got them this great deal, the business won't accept it. No, that you got them on the deal on your terms, not on theirs, right? So let's just be so clear about that. Also, when they do that, they're trying to rush through the agreement and by saying this is just standard language. And it's like, well, will your attorneys even have time to redline it? After they get our red lines, will they even have time to do that in 15 business days? And they're like, well, we didn't think there would be any red lines because we went over all of these terms and blah blah blah. No, there should always be red lines in these contracts. And I think a lot of times the SIs are so good at getting them in there by signing these types of agreements. I think the case study for this right now is the Zimmer Biomet Deloitte lawsuit, where they signed a contract saying Deloitte isn't liable for any technology failure, which is wild, right? Absolutely wild. You are absolutely liable if my technology fails. Does that mean that there shouldn't be language in there of the business needs to do their job? Absolutely not, right? The business needs to show up and do their job and be good clients and good partners. But you cannot sign your life away in these types of contracts. And so they need to be structured around milestones that make sense for you, not that make sense for the SI. I think a lot of these bigger, especially bigger SIs, Deloitte, Accenture, PwC, all of these, especially offshore, Infosys, those types of people really, really rush through that process, and they don't take any accountability when these things get hard, right? And that to me is why I call them the SaaS mafia, because to me, that's corruption, right? That's baiting someone into giving you money and not delivering a product. It's buying something online and then not shipping the product. That's illegal, right? I think that it should be the same way. So it matters how we fail, and the postmortem has to be honest. Absolutely. Let's see. The internet went out? What, Andrew? You obviously need a new system, right? Is S4HANA, I would cry. Cry about what? If someone's making you cry, I'm ready to fight. Obviously, I'm always ready to fight, but you tell me, right? S4HANA is nice or no? It totally depends. S4HANA is a great system, but it's definitely not. I talk to a lot of companies. If you're not over 5 billion at least in revenue, you don't need to be talking about S4HANA, right? There's no reason to buy this massive, huge, complex system unless you need it. If you're not an SAP client right now, I wouldn't recommend buying S4HANA unless you did a thorough evaluation. It's a good fit for you, right? Because you're going to be locked into the SAP environment for the rest of your life. So marginalized people have much harsher consequences when they are perceived as failing. I would completely agree with that, right? I can't wait to read those court documents. You go for it. It's giving Elizabeth Holmes energy. Me? I feel like she's in jail. Is that a good thing? I mean, I could go to jail very easily. I've never quite been, but I know I could see it for me in certain situations. They're doing construction down the street and touched the wrong wire. Haven't we all? Oh, the court case you mentioned. Yeah, so Zimmer Biomet, if you guys haven't heard of it, I have a video on it on my channel. It's a really interesting case. So, and this is a good one for SAP type of conversation. So I'll give you like the fast version of it. So they're a medical device company that hired Deloitte to help them choose like what they needed to do as far as technology. They had JD Edwards. JD Edwards Oracle has been trying to sunset it for 10 years, probably 20, right? And I know a lot of you will say they still do releases. That's because people like JD Edwards. It's certainly not something that Oracle wants you to have. They want you to have their newest system, right? And so they were going off of that. Deloitte came in, did like this whole evaluation. You were like, S4HANA is for you. Like you need to go SAP. Like we could, look at the dotted lines together and think about, I wonder how much the biggest software in the world pays Deloitte to say that. That's alleged, right? For entertainment purposes only. I'm just saying that when we follow the money, it's really not that challenging to make that assumption. Did they do that? I have no idea, but Zimmer Biomet certainly thinks they did. So anyway, they go down this whole thing. They have this botched implementation. It costs them hundreds of millions of dollars in disruption and just a complete broken system. And then Deloitte ghosts them. And this happens all the time. I've seen it happen all the time. The amount of ghosting that goes on when things get hard, right? They're all for, a kickoff call that's going to have 10,000 different people on there so they can all bill you by the hour. But they're certainly not there for when things get hard. EY just did this to one of our clients as well, where they, had an S4HANA failure, implementations nowhere to be found, which is just wild to me, right? Anyway, they took suit against Deloitte saying like, you can't do this, right? Was Deloitte a consulting firm? Yeah, so it was their system integrator and consulting firm, right? Conflict of interest. When you're selling the software and you're also, paying for strategic advice around which software you should choose, obviously they're going to choose the software that they sell, right? That's not that challenging. When you go into a shoe store and you say, hey, what shoes should I buy? They're not going to be like, you know what? I think you should go to Nike down the street, right? That doesn't make any sense. So that's what that story is. In November of 2025, Deloitte countersued and said, you can't do this because of our contracts, right? We're not liable for any technology failure, which honestly, they're right? Like that contract is right. And so good on Zimmer Biomet for trying to hold them accountable, but I don't know how it will go down for them, right? And we have a lot of SaaS attorneys that work in our ecosystem because all of our clients, when we do like bigger contract reviews, they're gonna focus on a specialized SaaS attorney to come in for privilege and for a variety of different reasons, right? That's why all of that setup is so important. It takes time. You cannot rush through it because you'll be in this situation, right? Yeah, and they, a lot of times what happens in these situations, especially if it's private sector, is they're going to settle out of court. And that's a lot of times that's what happens with Hertz. That's what happened with a variety of different lawsuits on this level that go that far, right? Most of the time, we're going to see some type of settlement and NDA, right? That's why we don't hear a lot about this because, before you can sue Oracle, they sue you and say, hey, you didn't pay your license fees. It's a breach of contract. And you're like, whoa. Like, that's because you didn't give me what I wanted. And they'll be like, okay, well, whatever. We'll give you $10 million back in licenses fees and we'll just pretend this never happened, right? That's alleged for entertainment purposes only, right? I don't have an NDA, right? I don't sign that shit. So I can say whatever I want, until I get a cease and desist letter and add to my collection. So civil lawsuit could go both ways for sure, right? But that's what the executives need to know. That's what they need to be aware of like even internal counsel on these types of bigger implementations. That's not enough. You need a specialist to be able to look at this. It's like liability insurance, right? And they come and do all of these assessments around like, is this safe? Is this not safe? You need a specialized safety tech to come in there, right? and pin it to the fridge with the others, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. I like to frame them just to remind people of why I'm on the internet saying what we all should be saying is that you deserve good technology and you deserve honest executives, that are going to be as honest with you as they possibly can, that have your best interest in mind, not the boards, not donors, not all those things. Is it their job to manage and balance all of that? Yeah, that's why they get paid, $800,000 a year. So that's why they have that job, is they need to be able to manage all of that. But you are a big, big part of that. And so when we see an executive kind of blocking technology, we really need to get to the bottom of that, because do they have a reason for doing that? Because they might, right? So if we pass a law against NDAs and no wrongdoing clause in settlements, how will businesses adapt? That's a really interesting question that I will take back and ask our attorneys. To be totally honest with you, I have an NDA. We also can't gamble on basketball. So what are you doing right now, Andrew, during March Madness? Are you like me, that's obsessed with that kid from Florida who was 7 feet tall at 12 years old, which I think is insane. Watching him stand next to, he's 7'9". Oh, college we can, not NBA. Thank God. So you should meet Mick on his channel. Mick is a former Sweet 16 collegiate athlete, basketball player. You mean Florida that got beat by Iowa? There he is. Doesn't matter how tall you are when the Iowa boys are coming. So I did, just a little quick caveat, I did a workshop the other day for the Women in Manufacturing Association, and I made the teams, different NFL teams here in the US. I made them each table, the NFL teams, right? So we had the Chicago Bears, sorry for them. We had the Patriots, we had a few others. And then I had the John Deere team in the room that was from Iowa. And I'm like, what are we going to do with you guys? Because we don't got anything out there. So, oh, here we go. First seed in, first seed out. Love the March Madness talk. But in the last few minutes here, I just want to give you some tips to kind of take if you're having issues with your executives, right? So really building out that business case, it's going to be specific, again, to the actual system. So a vendor can help you do that, right? Should they be doing it all for you? No. But if they've been in your industry before and you're kind of talking them through that, they should be very helpful to you in making your executives see why this specifically is a good idea. I think always going in and leading with the solution, that's not what we're doing, right? We're leading with the problem, right? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? The solution will make itself known, right? If it's the right one. Also, don't go in system specific. If we need a new ERP system because this one sucks and everybody, hates it, cool, right? But we're not going to go in and say, hey, I want you to choose SAP, because we've already boxed in our options. That's not just a good business strategy in general, but that's already assuming that you know what the executives want to do, right? And so going in with saying hey, I want this to be able to be an evaluation, right? Biting off those smaller size pieces. Not, I want to spend $50 million on SAP, right? So we help to do that, right? Outside experts agreeing often ups your credibility if execs are open-minded. I agree. And even your current system integrators that are helping you, or your IT services or anything like that. I think it's great when you collaborate between departments. When the business case comes and it's from the director of IT and the director of engineering and the director of finance, obviously they work together to figure out this solution. And that's going to be a huge piece of that. It's not just coming from IT who wants the coolest, newest tech out there. It's hey, we work together as leaders of this business to come up with a new idea that we want to bring to you. That's very hard to argue with when you have that cross-departmental collaboration. So that's a big piece of that. I think another thing is doing your homework on what do SaaS agreements look like. Who's your hyperscaler now, right? Are you on AWS? Are you on Azure? Are you on, whatever else? Or what's going to work with your current systems? These are our integration network. This is our system architecture. These are things that are pain points. Starting to show that you've mapped that out, not just, someone told me at a conference one time that we need Epicor to be competitive. Well, I'm sure Epicor told you that, right? At the same conference I was doing that workshop at, right, is the Oracle was there. They were a main sponsor. They wanted, everyone to think that Oracle was their greatest answer. Of course, when they see me come in, they're like, oh, there's that lady. But Oracle is a great fit for an Oracle company, right? But if we're looking like at a mid-sized manufacturer, Oracle is a terrible fit, right? So we're not going to force them into NetSuite, and we're not going to force them onto Oracle. If they like JD Edwards, there's lots of opportunities to continue to work with JD Edwards, right? We're not forcing solutions on businesses. We're looking at their problem, and we're seeing where we go from there. And that's a huge piece that we need to just continue to really look into. And that's a big part of what you can put together for executives. And so if you're in a situation where, you have a very illiterate technology executive, you got to do some like Nancy Drewing. I know a lot of you are way too young for Nancy Drew, but from a mystery standpoint of what motivates that executive, right? What are they motivated by? And a lot of times you can see that through just basic things that they're saying. What are they preaching? What's important to them? Attach that, right, to what your project is and go from there, right? Once they kind of get that foot in the door and understand, oh, this might be a great decision, then manipulate them. Got it, right? No, understand their motivations just as they should be understanding yours, right? I have many team members that work very differently than one another, right? I picture the Mean Girls entrance when you walk in. Here she comes. Actually, no, right? Many of my colleagues are they have very good colleagues at Oracle, especially on the HCM side. I do think they have a good HCM solution for manufacturing, but especially at women in manufacturing, right? They're well aware of what they're selling and who's it's a good fit for. At bigger conferences where I have to hear tech dudes talk about stupid shit, I've spent a career doing that, right? So no problem there either. But I've got many vendors that actually see us as an opportunity for them, because a lot of times, especially in like the Microsoft world, a business will come to them and be like, I guess I want D365 because I have Office 365 and I want all these other things. I'm on Azure, whatever. And the vendor will come to us and be like, hey man, these people are a mess. I can't sell them anything because no matter what I sell them, it's going to be an absolute flop, which will be bad on me, right? And bad on them. So can you please come in, help them get their act together, and then just give me a call when that happened? That's a career of trust, right? I have never, ever not called them back. Even in a system where like they might be choosing something else, I'm still going to call that vendor back and be like, here's why, here's the issue. This wouldn't have been a good move for you because of this. And then I continue to bring them business elsewhere, right? But I'm never, ever going to kind of go back on them from bringing me a client that legit needs help, right? So we are friends. We joke about how we're frenemies. And if they do weird shit, I'm going to call them on it. Like, that's always going to be our role, right? We do not care what the vendor wants. We care what's best for the business. Is companies ready to change in the game? Like the SaaS companies, you mean? Are they ready to change their game? No, absolutely not. I think they're buckling down in their game, if anything else. I hope this next year really shows them, especially like stupid shit like agent force and AI agents and blah, blah, blah. Now they're trying to be like more in the AI game. And I think that's not to the benefit of the customer, it's to the benefit of their shareholders. So they got to figure that out, how they stop locking people in and trapping them, because the average consumer is getting more savvy, right? And businesses have more competition. They can't gobble up every single tier 2 solution because they're getting too big. SaaS to intelligence as a service. I think many businesses will get there. If they can have the data architecture, will be the biggest tell to that, right? So many times, we still go into a lot, and it's usually the client that's like, hey man, I really, really want AI agents all over. It's like, okay, where's your data? And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, okay, we got lots to do before we get to that level. Like, good job for thinking big, but we also have to, think in reality. So I had a software company pitch that they could repair our internal data prior to implementation. I called BS immediately. I think that's one, smart of you, and two, I know we're up against time. I'm going to get off here in a second. I promise. But I really do think this needs to be said. Just like AI agents, everyone and their mom is selling that. Everyone and their mom is selling data cleanup because it's a huge need. Some people do it really well. Some people have no idea what data cleanup means. And I think if you're going to hire externally to manage your data, you just have to remember